The door creaked open, and there he was, Ethan, standing in the empty room, his eyes locked onto mine. A flutter of nerves raced through me, my heart pounding like a drum in the stillness. I glanced around, the silence wrapping us in a bubble, broken only by the frantic rhythm of our hearts. David was out of town, blissfully unaware of what was unfolding. Ethan, I breathed, the name tasting foreign yet intoxicating on my lips. Hey, he replied, his voice low and inviting. The tension crackled in the air, thick with a mix of anxiety and something else, something dangerously close to desire. I swallowed hard, a fleeting thought of David flashing through my mind. How could I be here, in this moment with Ethan? Yet the pull between us was undeniable. It was as if the universe conspired to bring us together, despite the chaos it could unleash. Are you sure about this? He asked, taking a step closer. The way he looked at me sent shivers down my spine, igniting flames of longing I had tried to suppress. I hesitated, torn between loyalty and a craving I had never felt before. I don't know, but I can't help myself. His gaze softened, and for a split second, I felt like the only person in the world. The weight of my choices loomed over me, yet the thrill of the unknown was intoxicating. Would I regret this moment? Or was it the beginning of something I had been yearning for, even if I didn't yet understand it? I stood at the threshold of the empty house, the door creaking open slowly, and there he was, Ethan. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the sight of him, leaning casually against the wall, his dark hair tousled just the way I liked it. The air was thick with unspoken words, and the only sounds that broke the silence were the frantic beats of our hearts. I felt a rush of adrenaline and anxiety coursing through me, a feeling that twisted in my stomach. "Hey," Ethan said, his voice low and warm, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I wasn't sure you'd come." I hesitated, my mind racing with thoughts of David. He was away on business, and I had told him I was meeting a friend for coffee. But this was so much more than just coffee. I had no idea what I was doing, yet my body betrayed me. It craved him. I stepped inside, and the door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in together like a secret. It's been a while," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know if it was a good idea. Ethan pushed himself off the wall and took a step closer, his gaze locking onto mine. "Sometimes the best things are the ones that seem wrong," he said, his eyes searching mine. I could feel the heat radiating between us, a magnetic pull I could no longer ignore. I swallowed hard as I recalled the first time we met, at a friend's birthday party in San Francisco. The memory flooded back vividly, as if it had just happened yesterday. I had been laughing with friends when I first caught sight of him across the room. He was animated, his laughter infectious, and I found myself drawn to him like a moth to a flame. "Do you remember that night?" I asked, unable to resist the urge to bring it up. "The party?" A slow smile spread across his face, and I felt my heart race with the memory. "How could I forget? You were the most beautiful woman in the room," he replied, his voice rich with sincerity. We kept stealing glances at each other. "I thought I was being so obvious," I admitted, a laugh escaping my lips. "I couldn't focus on anything else. It was like you were the only person in the room." Ethan took another step forward, closing the distance between us. "And when you finally came over to talk to me, it felt like everything else faded away." I nodded, recalling how we had spent hours lost in conversation, forgetting the world around us. My laughter had come easily, and our chemistry was undeniable, making me forget about David for just a moment. "You invited me for coffee that night," I murmured, "but it turned into so much more." "We talked for hours," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "I felt like I had known you forever." Me too, I confessed. But I didn't want to think about how wrong it was. I was with David. I know, he said softly, his eyes darkening. But there was something about you, something I couldn't ignore. A wave of heat washed over me as I remembered the way he looked at me that night, as if I were the only thing that mattered. The thrill of that connection still lingered, igniting a fire within me that I couldn't extinguish. I shouldn't be here, I whispered, my voice trembling with uncertainty. Maybe, he replied, stepping even closer, his presence overwhelming. But we are here, and we can't pretend there isn't something between us. I felt an electric charge fill the air as we stood mere inches apart. I could see the desire in his eyes, and it mirrored the longing that had taken root within me since that first encounter. I glanced towards the window, the sunlight streaming in, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air. But in that moment, all I could focus on was him. Ethan, I began, but he silenced me with a finger against my lips. Just let it happen, he urged, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down my spine. I hesitated, my heart racing as I battled the guilt that threatened to swallow me whole. But as I looked into his eyes, I remembered the laughter, the connection, the way he made me feel alive. With David away, this was my chance to explore something forbidden, something exhilarating. I nodded, a small gesture that seemed to break the dam holding back my desires. And just like that, he leaned in, capturing my lips with his. It was electrifying, a jolt of passion that ignited every nerve ending in my body. I melted against him, my hands finding their way to his hair as I kissed him back, pouring all the longing I had felt into that moment. I've wanted to do this since the first night we met, he murmured against my lips, his breath hot and intoxicating. You have no idea how much I've thought about you. I pulled back slightly, searching his gaze. But what about David? He doesn't have to know, Ethan said, his voice firm yet gentle. We can have this moment, just you and me. As the tension between us crackled in the air, I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with an undercurrent of fear. I knew I was crossing a line, but in that instant, all that mattered was the way my heart raced in response to him. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us, two souls caught in a web of desire and betrayal, trapped in a moment that felt too good to resist. I stood at the threshold, my heart racing as I pushed the door open. The creak echoed in the empty house, and there he was, Ethan. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a familiar smirk playing on his lips. My breath caught in my throat. The silence enveloped us, heavy and charged, only broken by the sound of our quickening heartbeats. Hey, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I wasn't sure you'd come. I hesitated, the fleeting thought of David flitting through my mind. He was out of town, on yet another business trip, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I should have been home, waiting for his call, but all I could think about was Ethan standing in front of me, an undeniable pull, drawing me closer. I had to see you, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The tension between us was palpable, an electric current that made my skin tingle. It was a mix of anxiety and desire, and I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. He took a step closer, and I inhaled sharply as I felt the heat radiating from him. You look beautiful, he said, his eyes darkening with an intensity that made my stomach flip. My heart raced, and I felt a thrill of excitement mixed with that nagging guilt about David. Ethan, we shouldn't, I began, but he silenced me with a finger on my lips, his touch sending shivers down my spine. Just for a moment, he urged, his gaze piercing into mine. Let's forget everything else. It was tempting, so very tempting. I nodded, and he smiled, that wicked smile that made my knees weak. As he reached for my hand, I felt a spark, Our fingers brushed, and it was as if the world around us vanished. The weight of my choices pressed heavily on my shoulders, but in that instant, all I wanted was to be close to him. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Ethan asked, his voice softening as he led me to the small living area. I was lost in his eyes, the memory flooding back. "Of course," I breathed, recalling the birthday party in San Francisco. The laughter and the way his gaze lingered on me. It was electric. He chuckled softly, and I felt warmth spread through me. "I couldn't take my eyes off you. I thought I might be dreaming." "I was with David then," I reminded him, the guilt creeping back in. I shouldn't have let myself get swept away. "But you did," he said, his tone teasing. "And look where we are now." I bit my lip, torn between my commitment to David and the undeniable connection I felt with Ethan. "This is wrong," I whispered, but part of me didn't want to believe it. "Is it?" he asked, stepping closer until I could feel his breath against my skin. "Or is it just what you want?" He was right. My heart raced at the thought of being with him, of exploring this wild, reckless side of myself that had been hidden away for so long. "I can't keep doing this," I murmured, but my voice lacked conviction. "Then let's just be here now," he suggested, his eyes searching mine. "Let's not think about anything else." As he leaned in, my heart raced with fear and excitement. Our lips met, and the world fell away. It was a kiss that felt like magic, igniting a fire inside me. His hands cradled my face, and I melted against him, losing myself in the moment. When we finally pulled apart, I gasped for air, my heart pounding. "Ethan, what are we doing?" I asked, trembling with the weight of our actions. "Just living," he replied, his voice steady and reassuring. "Just living in this moment." But it wasn't just a moment. It was a decision that would change everything. I felt alive, but the guilt gnawed at me. I was betraying David, the man who loved me unconditionally, who trusted me. Yet the thrill of being with Ethan was intoxicating, drawing me deeper into a web of desire I never thought I would be caught in. "Maybe we should stop," I suggested, my voice wavering, "before it goes too far." Ethan's expression shifted, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. "You don't want this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not that," I said quickly, desperate to explain. "It's just, I don't want to hurt David." "But what about what you want?" He pressed gently, his eyes searching mine. "You deserve happiness too." His words struck a chord within me. I had been so focused on being the perfect wife that I had forgotten about my own happiness. I felt trapped in a life that had become predictable, and Ethan was the breath of fresh air I craved. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling with uncertainty. "I don't know what I want anymore." "Maybe we can figure it out together," he suggested, his tone hopeful. "Just give in to this, just for tonight." And as I looked into his eyes, I knew I was standing on the precipice of something life-changing. The thrill of being wanted, of being desired, was too strong to resist. I was torn between the life I had built and the passion that beckoned me to take a leap into the unknown. "Okay," I finally breathed. "Just for tonight." The moment I said it, I felt a wave of liberation mixed with dread. I had crossed a line, and there would be no turning back. But even as the fear settled in, the excitement surged within me. In that empty house, with Ethan so close, I was ready to embrace whatever came next. The door creaked open, and there he was, Ethan, leaning casually against the wall of the empty living room. His dark hair tousled just enough to make him look effortlessly handsome. The moment our eyes met, a rush of emotions flooded through me. I could hear the rapid beat of my heart, drowning out the silence that hung thick in the air between us. "Hey," he said, his voice low and warm, sending shivers down my spine. "Hey," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, a reminder that David was out of town, oblivious to what was about to unfold. A fleeting thought of him crossed my mind, and I felt a pang of guilt. I quickly pushed it aside. This was my moment, and the tension between us was undeniable. Ethan took a step closer, his gaze intense and searching. "You look different," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Different how?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart raced more with each passing second. "Like you're ready for something new," he replied, his eyes locking onto mine. It was as if he could see right through me, into the part of me that craved excitement, that longed for the thrill of the forbidden. "I suppose I am," I admitted, a rush of warmth spreading through me. My thoughts flickered to David again, but the way Ethan was looking at me made it hard to remember why I should feel guilty. "Good," he said, stepping even closer, our bodies almost touching now. "Because I've been thinking about you a lot." The air crackled with unspoken words, and I could feel the pull between us strengthening. "I've been thinking about you too," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. The truth hung between us, raw and electrifying. "What are we doing?" he asked, his voice low and filled with intensity. "I don't know," I replied, my heart racing. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Ethan, not when David is away." His eyes darkened with desire, and I could see the conflict in his expression. "You know this is risky, right? If someone finds out—" "I know," I interrupted, feeling a rush of defiance. "But I can't help it. It's like I'm drawn to you." Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered against my skin, igniting a fire within me. "Maybe we should stop this before it goes too far," he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I don't want to stop," I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. "Neither do I," he admitted, his voice barely above a murmur. The air around us thickened with unspoken promises, and before I knew it, I found myself leaning closer. In that moment, everything else faded away. The guilt, the worry, the reality of my life with David. All that mattered was Ethan and the way he made me feel alive. I closed the distance between us, our lips brushing softly at first, then deepening into a kiss that sent shockwaves through my entire being. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer as if he were afraid I might disappear. I melted against him, losing myself in the taste of him, in the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world. We pulled away, breathless. "What are we doing?" he asked again, this time with a hint of urgency. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding, "but I don't want to think about it right now." "Neither do I," he agreed, his gaze searching mine. "All I want is to be with you." In that moment, I knew I was teetering on the edge of something dangerous. I thought of David, the life we had built together, but the thrill of this illicit connection with Ethan was intoxicating. "You have to promise me something," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of my words. "Promise me. This stays between us. No one can know." "Of course," Ethan replied earnestly, his eyes locked onto mine. "This is our secret." I felt a rush of adrenaline. We were crossing a boundary that I had never imagined I would even consider. But standing there, with Ethan so close, it felt exhilarating. "Just this once," I whispered, almost to myself. "Just this once, I want to be free." He smiled, the kind of smile that made my heart flutter. "Then let's make it unforgettable." As we leaned in again, I felt the weight of my choice press down on me. I was stepping into the unknown, But the thrill of it all made me feel more alive than I had in years. The thrill of the chase, the forbidden nature of our connection. It was intoxicating. In that empty house, with Ethan's arms wrapped around me, I was ready to lose myself entirely. The door creaked open, and there he was, Ethan, standing in the dim light of the empty living room. My breath caught in my throat as I took in the sight of him. It felt surreal, almost like a dream. The air hung heavy between us, charged with unspoken words and emotions. I could hear the pounding of my heart, drowning out the silence that enveloped us. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low and laced with concern. I felt a flicker of doubt, a fleeting thought of David. He was out of town, attending a conference, and here I was, standing in front of another man, a man who had stirred something deep within me. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "But I can't stop thinking about you." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. I could see the mix of anxiety and desire mirrored in his gaze. "Then let's not think. Just feel," he urged, his words wrapping around me like a warm embrace. The tension between us was palpable, a magnetic force drawing us together. My heart raced as he reached out, brushing a stray hair behind my ear. "You're so beautiful," he said softly, and I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. It was a compliment that made me feel alive, igniting a spark I hadn't realized I'd been missing. "Ethan," I started, but the words got lost as he leaned in, capturing my lips with his. The kiss was electric, sending shivers down my spine. It was everything I had imagined and more, a collision of need and longing that washed over me in waves. I was aware of the enormity of what I was doing, but in that moment, all I could think about was him. The kiss deepened, and I melted against him, my hands finding their way to the back of his neck. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, and I let out a soft moan, a sound I hadn't intended to make. The guilt of my betrayal flickered in the back of my mind, but it was quickly overshadowed by the intoxicating rush of desire. "Are you sure we should be doing this?" I whispered between kisses, my breath hitching in my throat. Ethan pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against mine. "I want you, and I can't pretend I don't anymore, not after everything we've shared." His breath was warm against my skin, and I felt my resolve weakening. I closed my eyes, trying to gather my thoughts. "But David..." The name felt like a weight, a reminder of the life I was supposed to uphold. "David is not here. He doesn't have to know," Ethan replied, his voice low and persuasive. "This is just between us, our moment." I knew he was right, but the guilt gnawed at me. What if he finds out? What if... "Let's not think about that now," he interrupted gently. "Just focus on us." His hand slid down my arms, sending tingles across my skin. I could feel the gravity of my choices pulling me in two directions. Part of me wanted to run, to escape the temptation, while another part craved this connection, this thrilling escape from reality. "Okay," I finally whispered, the word barely escaping my lips as I surrendered to the moment. The guilt didn't vanish, but the pull of desire was stronger. Ethan's lips met mine again, and I lost myself in the kiss, the world beyond the walls of that empty house fading away. Our bodies pressed together, and I could feel the heat radiating off him. It was as if we were two magnets, drawn together by an irresistible force. We stumbled back, my back hitting the wall as he pushed his body against mine. I gasped, feeling the rush of adrenaline course through me. "I need you," he murmured against my mouth, and the raw need in his voice sent shivers through me. "I shouldn't," I protested weakly, even as my body betrayed my words, leaning into him, craving more. "Just let go," he urged, capturing my lips again, his hands exploring my waist, igniting a fire within me that I hadn't known existed. The kiss was fierce, a blend of urgency and passion that consumed us both. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. I was crossing a line, stepping into a world where I was no longer just David's wife, but a woman lost in the arms of another man. And the thrill of that thought was intoxicating. "Ethan," I breathed, feeling my heart race as he pulled away slightly, his eyes dark and filled with desire. "Let's not think about anything else. Just us," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest as I surrendered to the moment, to the pull of desire that had brought us together in this place. I was fully aware of the consequences, the betrayal that was unfolding, but in that moment, all I could feel was the heat of his body against mine and the promise of what was to come. The world outside ceased to exist, and for a fleeting moment, I felt free. I stood at the threshold of the empty house, my heart racing as the door swung open. There he was, Ethan. He leaned casually against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips. And for a moment, time stood still. The silence enveloped us, a heavy blanket that felt charged with unspoken words. My mind flickered to David, my husband, who was out of town for the weekend. A familiar wave of guilt washed over me, but it quickly faded under Ethan's intense gaze. "Are you going to stand there all day?" Ethan teased, his voice low and inviting. I felt a rush of warmth spread through me, igniting a flame I had tried so hard to suppress. I just didn't expect you to be here," I stammered, stepping inside. The air felt thick with tension, a mix of anxiety and undeniable desire swirling between us. "You've got to admit, this place has a certain charm," he said, glancing around the dimly lit room. "It's almost like it was waiting for us." I couldn't help but laugh nervously. "Waiting for us? You're being dramatic." But deep down, I knew he was right. This house, abandoned and echoing with memories, felt like a backdrop to our own story. A narrative filled with secrets, longing, and the thrill of the forbidden. Ethan took a step closer, closing the distance between us. Dramatic? Maybe, but I've been thinking about this moment ever since we met. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The truth was, I had thought about it too. A part of me had fantasized about crossing this line, but I never imagined it would feel so exhilarating and terrifying all at once. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding against my ribcage. "Ethan, we shouldn't..." I started, but the protest felt weak even as I spoke it. "Shouldn't?" he interrupted, tilting his head slightly. "Why not? David isn't here. It's just us." The way he looked at me, his eyes dark and filled with promise, made it hard to breathe. "Because it's wrong," I finally managed, though my voice was barely above a whisper. I could feel the weight of my own words, the responsibility of my marriage pressing down on me. Yet, the thought of resisting him felt unbearable. "Is it really wrong?" Ethan challenged, stepping even closer until I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "What if it's just what we need? What if it's just what you need?" His words struck a chord deep within me, igniting a desire I had tried to bury beneath layers of loyalty and obligation. I glanced away, my mind racing. David was my husband, the man I had promised to love and cherish. But in this moment, standing before Ethan, those promises felt like a distant echo. I don't know," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Then let's not think about it," he said softly, his hand brushing against my arm as he moved closer. "Just feel. Just be with me." I inhaled sharply, the air thick with the scent of him, warm, intoxicating, and laced with a hint of danger. My heart raced, and every rational thought slipped away as I looked into his eyes. They were filled with a mix of desire and something deeper, something that made me feel alive. "Ethan," I breathed, but he silenced me with a finger pressed gently against my lips. "Just let it happen," he murmured, his voice a low rasp that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the tension crackling between us, an electric charge that pulled me closer to him, as if an invisible string connected us. My resolve crumbled, and I found myself leaning into him, the soft brush of his lips against mine, igniting a fire I never knew existed. For that brief moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of us and the undeniable connection we shared. As our lips moved together, I felt a rush of exhilaration and fear, a thrilling reminder of everything I was risking. "I should stop," I whispered against his mouth, but my body betrayed me, leaning in closer, craving more. "Why would you want to?" Ethan replied, his hands finding their way to my waist, pulling me against him. "This is real. This is us." The urgency in his voice made my heart race even faster. I knew I was treading dangerous waters, but the thought of pulling away felt like a betrayal of its own. I wanted to surrender, to lose myself in this moment with him, even if I was stepping away from everything I had ever known. "Ethan," I breathed, the sound a mix of longing and desperation. "Just one night," he promised, his lips brushing against my ear, sending shivers down my spine. "Let's just be here, right now. No past, no future, just us." The weight of my choices loomed over me, but the thrill of what lay ahead was intoxicating. I felt myself nodding, caught in the tide of emotion that surged between us. "Okay," I finally said, my voice barely audible. "Just for tonight." As those words left my lips, I knew I was crossing a line, stepping into a world of shadows and secrets. Yet, the thrill of the unknown beckoned me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. The door creaked open, and there he was, Ethan. Standing in the middle of the empty room, he looked as if he had stepped out of my most secret fantasies. My heart raced, echoing in the silence that enveloped us like a thick fog. I could feel the weight of the moment, the air charged with an energy that was impossible to ignore. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring us to this point, just the two of us. "Hey," he said softly, his voice a mix of surprise and longing. "Hi," I replied, trying to sound casual, even though my insides felt like they were twisting in knots. The thought of my husband, David, who was away on a business trip, flickered through my mind. I should have felt guilty, but all I could think about was Ethan's presence, the way his dark hair fell slightly over his forehead and the intensity of his gaze. The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick. I could almost hear the sound of our hearts beating in unison, both racing, both filled with anticipation. The tension was undeniable, a mix of anxiety and an undeniable desire that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Ethan admitted, stepping closer. "Neither was I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. The truth was, I had been wrestling with myself for days, caught between the life I had built with David and the inexplicable pull I felt towards Ethan. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern flashing across his features. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and for a moment, it made me feel cherished. I can't believe we're here," I said, looking down, suddenly feeling vulnerable. "I know," he replied, his tone gentle yet filled with longing. "But I want to be here with you, just us." His words sent a shiver down my spine. The thrill of being alone with him, away from the constraints of my marriage, was intoxicating. "What if someone finds out?" I whispered, a small part of me still clinging to the reality of my situation. Ethan took another step closer, his warmth wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. "Let them find out," he said, his voice low and steady. "This is about us, not them." I looked up at him, my heart pounding. It felt like the world outside had ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, standing in that empty house, and the possibilities felt endless. The thought of David slipped away as the chemistry between us ignited a fire I had never felt before. "Do you really mean that?" I asked, seeking reassurance. "Every word," Ethan said, his eyes locking onto mine. "I want you, and I want to explore this, whatever this is, together." My breath hitched in my throat. I was terrified and exhilarated all at once. "What if I regret this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Regret what?" he pressed, his expression softening. "Regret feeling something real? You deserve to feel alive, to feel wanted. This is your chance." His words wrapped around me, and the heat in my cheeks betrayed my thoughts. I wanted to say no, to turn back and forget about everything that had happened since we met. But the truth was, I didn't want to. I wanted to let go of the guilt, the fear, and just lose myself in this moment with Ethan. "Okay," I breathed, feeling the weight of my decisions settle in my stomach. "Let's see where this takes us." A smile broke across Ethan's face, lighting up the room. "You won't regret it," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. And in that moment, I believed him. The anticipation hung in the air, a tangible force drawing us closer together. As we stood there, the world outside faded away, leaving only the two of us and our unspoken desires. "Come here," he said, his hand gently reaching for mine. The warmth of his touch sent electricity coursing through me, igniting a fire I had kept buried for far too long. I took a step closer, and our bodies aligned, the tension between us crackling like static electricity. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, my heart racing. "Now," he said, leaning in. "We let go." And with that, he kissed me. It was soft at first, a gentle exploration of lips that had been yearning for this connection. But as the kiss deepened, it became a passionate surge that swept me off my feet. I felt the world around us dissolve, and all that mattered was the heat of his body against mine and the intoxicating taste of his mouth. As we pulled away, breathless and dazed, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. The thrill of being with Ethan felt like a wild adventure, a chance to break free from the confines of my mundane life. But deep down, the weight of my choices loomed large, a shadow I could not ignore. "I wish this could last forever," I admitted, the words escaping my lips before I could stop them. "Maybe it can," he said softly, his thumb brushing against my cheek. "But we have to make the most of it. No regrets, remember?" I nodded, feeling a mix of exhilaration and fear. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, and as I looked into Ethan's eyes, I knew I was ready to dive deeper into this unexpected journey, no matter where it might lead. I stood in front of the door, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. My heart raced as I reached for the handle, my mind racing with thoughts of David, my husband, who was miles away on a business trip. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, revealing Ethan standing in the dim light of the empty living room. "Hey," he said, a smile breaking across his face. "Hi," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The tension in the air wrapped around us like a thick fog. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, matching the rhythm of his own. The silence stretched between us, heavy and charged. I could hear the sound of our breathing, the intimacy of the moment almost overwhelming. For a fleeting instant, I thought about David. He was supposed to be busy, focused on work, and here I was, about to cross a line I had never imagined I would consider. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. I nodded, even though my mind was screaming at me to turn back. "I need this," I breathed out, the words escaping before I could think them through. Ethan stepped closer, the warmth radiating from him making it hard to think straight. "I need it too," he admitted, his gaze locking onto mine, searching for any hint of doubt. But all I could feel was the undeniable chemistry, the raw energy that had been simmering between us since the first moment we met. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. The air crackled with unspoken words and desires. "It's just, I can't stop thinking about you," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly. "Neither can I," he replied, his eyes darkening with intensity. "The way you looked at me at that party, I've been waiting for this moment since then." The memory of that night flooded back. Our shared glances, the laughter, the way he made me feel alive in a way I had forgotten was possible. I could almost hear the music from the party, feel the warmth of the San Francisco sun on my skin. It was all so intoxicating. And yet, here I was, teetering on the edge of a choice that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "David," I started, but Ethan cut me off gently. "Don't think about him right now. Just be here with me." His voice was soft, coaxing me into the moment, pulling me away from the guilt that threatened to consume me. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. The truth was, I wanted to be with him. The longing, the need, it was all too strong to resist. I took another step closer, our bodies nearly touching. "What if he finds out?" I whispered, a mix of fear and thrill coursing through me. Ethan reached out, brushing my hair behind my ear. "We won't let that happen," he promised, his fingers lingering on my skin, sending shivers down my spine. "Just focus on us, just for tonight." His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, and in that moment, I decided to let go of my fears. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I saw Ethan leaning closer, his breath mingling with mine. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us in that empty room filled with possibility. Before I could think twice, I leaned in, our lips meeting in a tentative kiss that quickly deepened. The moment our mouths connected, it felt like fireworks erupted around us. All the anxiety and guilt washed away, replaced by a surge of passion that I hadn't felt in far too long. I kissed him back, pouring all my pent-up desires into that single moment. "God, I've wanted this for so long," Ethan murmured against my lips, his hands finding their way to my waist, pulling me closer. "Me too," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. The heat radiating between us was electric, and I felt myself melting into him, forgetting everything else. As we kissed, I was acutely aware of the choices I was making. Each moment felt like a step further into the unknown. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The thrill of the secret, the danger of it all, wrapped around me like a tantalizing embrace. I pulled back slightly, looking into Ethan's eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation. Instead, I found only desire. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice shaking with anticipation. "Now, we enjoy each other," he said with a grin, his confidence igniting a fire within me. I took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline surge through me. "Okay," I said, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. I was standing on the edge of something I had never experienced before, and I was ready to leap. Ethan took my hand, leading me further into the room, the tension between us palpable. There was no going back now. I was ready to embrace the chaos that was unfolding before me. The only thing that mattered was the way he made me feel, and I was determined to lose myself in that feeling, if only for a while. The door creaked open, and there he was, Ethan, standing in the empty living room, waiting for me. My breath caught in my throat as I took him in, his presence both comforting and electrifying. The silence hung heavy around us, punctuated only by the sound of our hearts racing in unison. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, a mix of anxiety and undeniable desire that sent shivers down my spine. For a fleeting moment, my mind flickered to David, my husband, who was away on a business trip. I felt the weight of guilt settle over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the thrill of being here, with Ethan. I was torn between two worlds, the safe, familiar life with David and the intoxicating pull of something forbidden. "Hey," Ethan said, his voice low and smooth, breaking the silence. It sent a rush of warmth through me. "Hi," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, sealing us off from the outside world. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, concern flickering in his dark eyes. I hesitated, the question hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "I don't know, but I can't stop thinking about you." A smile crept onto his lips, the kind that made my heart skip a beat. "Neither can I." We stood there, just staring at each other, and the air thickened with unspoken words. I could feel the space between us shrink, and before I knew it, I was stepping closer, drawn in by an invisible force. My pulse quickened as I watched his gaze drop to my lips, and I felt a rush of heat flood my cheeks. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't know," he admitted, his eyes locked onto mine. "But it feels right, doesn't it?" I nodded slowly, my heart pounding. It was wrong, I knew that, but the thrill of the moment was intoxicating, and a part of me craved it. "It feels amazing," I confessed, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Ethan took another step closer, and I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Then let's not think about anything else right now," he said softly, his voice sending waves of desire coursing through me. I didn't need to think twice. I closed the distance between us, my heart racing as I tilted my head up, meeting his lips with mine. The kiss was tentative at first, both of us testing the waters, but it quickly deepened into something more passionate. I felt his hands slide around my waist, pulling me closer, and I melted into him. In that moment, everything else faded away. There was no David, no guilt, just Ethan and the electricity that surged between us. I lost myself in the kiss, my hands tangling in his hair as I pressed myself against him, wanting more. When we finally pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, the reality of what we were doing crashed down on me like a cold wave. "This is wrong," I whispered, my heart aching with the weight of my choices. Ethan cupped my face in his hands, his thumb brushing against my cheek. "Maybe, but it feels so right. We can't ignore this." I closed my eyes, torn between the warmth of his touch and the cold reality of my life with David. "I shouldn't be here," I murmured, guilt creeping back in. "Then let's make the most of the time we have," he urged, his voice thick with desire. "Just for tonight." I opened my eyes, searching his for any hint of hesitation. All I saw was a burning passion that mirrored my own. "Okay," I finally said, my heart racing. I was stepping into the unknown, and a part of me was terrified. But another part, the part that craved excitement and passion, was ready to dive in. Ethan smiled, and it was as if the world outside ceased to exist. We spent the next few moments wrapped in each other, sharing whispered secrets and soft laughter. Each touch ignited a fire within me, and every glance sent my heart tumbling. "I can't believe this is happening," I said breathlessly, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Believe it," he replied, his eyes dark with desire. "This is our moment." I leaned in again, kissing him hungrily, feeling the heat between us grow. The world outside faded into nothingness as we lost ourselves in the intensity of our connection. With each kiss, I felt myself slipping further from reality, caught up in a whirlwind of emotion and desire. "I don't want this to end," I confessed, pulling away just enough to look into his eyes. "Then let's not think about the end," he said, his voice low and sultry. "Let's just enjoy this." I nodded, losing myself in the moment, the weight of my reality fading into the background. In Ethan's arms, I felt alive, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. The door swung open, and there he was, Ethan, standing in the middle of the empty living room, waiting for me. His presence filled the space, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. My heart raced, a heavy silence enveloping us, punctuated only by the sound of our breathing. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and undeniable, an electric pull that seemed to draw me closer to him. "Hey," he said softly, a smile breaking through the weight of the moment. It was the kind of smile that turned my insides to liquid. "Hi," I managed to reply, my voice barely above a whisper. My mind flickered briefly to David, my husband, who was out of town, oblivious to the storm brewing in my heart. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be feeling this way. But as I stood there, looking into Ethan's eyes, all those thoughts faded into the background. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, concern lacing his voice. I don't know," I admitted, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. The truth was, I was terrified and exhilarated, a confusing cocktail of emotions swirling within me. He took a step closer, the air thickening with every inch he closed between us. "You don't have to be nervous. It's just us here." "Right," I said, trying to convince myself. But the truth was, I was anything but calm. The anticipation hung in the air like a charged storm, and I could feel the heat radiating from him. "I've been thinking about you," Ethan confessed, his gaze intense, "since that first night at the party." I felt a rush of heat flood my cheeks. How could he still remember that night? The laughter, the stolen glances, the way we had connected so effortlessly. "Me too," I replied, my voice barely audible. I didn't expect. I trailed off, not sure how to finish the thought. "What?" he pressed, his eyes searching mine. "I didn't expect to feel so drawn to you," I finally admitted. "It scares me." "Good," he said with a smirk, "because I think we're both scared." The admission hung in the air between us, a fragile truth that felt like a secret we were both keeping. I glanced around the empty house, the silence amplifying the weight of our conversation. "What do we do now?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Let's not think about that right now," Ethan said, his voice low and inviting. "Just be here with me." Before I could respond, he reached out, brushing his fingers against my arm. The touch sent a shiver down my spine, igniting a fire within me that I hadn't known existed. I looked up at him, and in that moment, everything else faded away. All the guilt, the fear, the obligations vanished, leaving only the two of us and the undeniable chemistry that crackled in the air. "Ethan," I started, but he silenced me with a finger to my lips. "Just let it happen," he murmured, his voice like velvet. And then, without another word, he closed the distance between us, capturing my lips with his. The kiss was electric, igniting something deep within me. It was everything I had been craving, a release from the confines of my life. I melted into him, my hands finding their way to his hair as I pulled him closer, deepening the kiss. In that moment, all thoughts of David slipped away, replaced by the raw passion I felt for Ethan. Time lost all meaning as we explored each other's mouths, our bodies responding to each other with a hunger that felt primal. "God, I've wanted this for so long," Ethan breathed against my lips, his eyes dark with desire. "Me too," I confessed, feeling a thrill at my own honesty. I was betraying David, but here with Ethan, I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Ethan stepped back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "Are you sure about this?" I hesitated, a flicker of doubt creeping in. "I shouldn't be here," I replied, my voice shaky. "What about David?" His expression softened, and he brushed a strand of hair behind my ear. "You deserve this, you know. Whatever this is, it's real." I wanted to argue, to pull away from the edge, but the pull between us was too strong. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "Scared is good," he replied, his thumb brushing against my cheek. "It means you care." And just like that, the walls I had built around my heart began to crumble. I stepped closer, closing the gap between us once more. "What if we get caught?" I asked, my voice trembling with both fear and excitement. "Then we deal with it," he said simply. "But for now, let's just enjoy this." With that, I surrendered to the moment, letting go of the world outside the door. I was lost in Ethan's passion, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. The night stretched out before us, full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next, even if it meant crossing lines I never thought I would.